Okay, we're going to get started, everybody. I think more people might be coming in, but welcome to M&P's Business Owner Series, Safeguarding Against Fraud and Cyber Threats. March is Fraud Prevention Month, so we thought that this presentation is timely to help protect your businesses from all the nasty frauds and cyber threats that are out there. So we're going to be going over a bunch of things today. My name is Ryan Duquette, and I am a partner and the national leader of digital forensics. And I'm going to be co-presenting with Phil Fodchuk, who is the partner and national leader of cybersecurity. Phil and I are both ex-law enforcement and have many years combined of fraud, cybersecurity, and digital forensics. Little bit of housekeeping. The final segment of this is going to be a Q&A session. To submit your questions, please click on the Q&A button near the bottom of your screen. If it's not showing up, click on the three dots button to expand it. And if you see a similar question already asked, you can also upvote that question. We're obviously going to try to address as many questions as possible, but in the event we do run out of time or you want some follow-up, please reach out anytime following the presentation. We are going to provide you at the end with our contact information. And just to let you know that any questions we don't get to, we will get a list of that. So, even if we don't get your question, we will follow up with you after the presentation. Lastly, this webinar will be recorded and a copy will be provided to everybody within a few days of the event. Just a little bit of a disclaimer here. I'm not going to really go into this, but it does contain a general overview of the subject solely for educational purposes and might not apply to specific cases or circumstances depending on situations that you might have, just for entertainment and educational purposes. And hopefully you learn a few things today. But if you do have any specific matters or cases, please feel free to reach out to Phil or myself. The agenda for today, and we're going to be splitting this up between Phil and myself. We're going to talk about how small and medium business owners are the perfect target for fraud and small and medium businesses. Talk a little bit about blurring the lines between personal and professional, taking the cyber out of cybersecurity. It's a matter of trust, process is protection. The key word is verification. And at the end, making time for good business. And then, like I mentioned, we will have time for Q&A following that. Every year, perpetrators come up with new methods for defrauding your company of its hard-earned capital. The hyper-evolution of the internet with AI on the rise continues to threaten businesses with new schemes. And it's really difficult to keep up with all the products and services required to defend against fraud. But security solutions all have one thing in common. When it comes to safeguarding your company, good business practice will always be your best protection. In 2022, the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre received over 90,000 fraud reports involving over $530 million in reported losses. And these are unfortunately the only the ones that get reported to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. There are lots of businesses out there that fall victim to fraud and cybercrime that don't report their stats. So in my opinion, these stats are very, very low, unfortunately. A lot of fraud attacks that used to be more personal in nature are now being directed toward businesses and business owners. In recent months, M&P has assisted clients who have unfortunately fallen victim to many of the frauds listed on this slide. And these types of scams are often international in nature, perpetrated by organized crime groups. And as you can see on this slide, like I mentioned earlier, there's the number of reports and the dollar loss. And those, in my opinion, are likely quite low because they don't account for unreported matters that were happening. But as you can see, a lot of the different frauds that are on here are over the internet as well, or more traditional frauds in nature. And we're going to be going over sort of both of those today. I talked a little bit about earlier about how the rise of AI is going to be impacting, not only frauds, fraud prevention, and cybersecurity as well. And I wanted to share a little bit of some clips here, an audio clip and a video clip that really show you AI and the power of it. The one I'm going to play first is a recording of me. I actually did a presentation on AI and fraud for a fraud conference a few months ago. And at the beginning of the conference, instead of me walking up and introducing the presentation, I decided to use AI. So I used a free AI tool that's out there on the web that you can use, and I directed that AI tool to various recordings of myself doing presentations online. I didn't have to say anything. And I walked up on stage and mouthed the words, but I played this audio clip that I'll play for you here.
Good afternoon, CFE. Welcome to our keynote talk on artificial intelligence and how it will impact our daily lives and investigations. While artificial intelligence is a term we see almost daily in the news, it has been a topic of research for a long time. However, more recent advances in computing power, especially cloud computing, have allowed us to take AI to higher levels.
So as you can see, with a little bit of technology and a free tool, and that took me about 5 minutes of time, it does sound a lot like me. Obviously, there are some changes there that you can tell. It does sound a little bit robotic, but again, that was a free tool. And people can take your voice and use it against you, unfortunately, to commit fraud. So voice manipulation and video manipulation are certainly something that we here at MNP are keeping a very close eye on and helping our clients with. The next one I want to play you here is actually a YouTube clip, and it's using the same technology. It's basically an attacker logging into a bank using the AI voice authentication. And I actually talked to a lot of my clients and my friends, and you can now log into your bank and your service providers, and they want you to use your voice as authentication. And I always talk a little bit about the perils of that and actually using your voice. Because your voice can be scraped online. So I'll play this video for you here.
Welcome to Lloyds Bank. So we can get you to the right place. In your own words, please say the reason for your call.
Check my balance.
Okay. Please say or key in your date of birth. Please say, my voice is my password.
My voice is my password.
Thank you. Here a balance. Using your keypad, please select one of the following two accounts. 1. Your classic account ending.
So kind of scary. Again, that was taken, somebody just off their recordings online, and somebody was actually able to voice authenticate into a bank account.
Good afternoon, CFE. Welcome to our keynote.
According to a Net Diligence 2023 cybercrime study, small to medium-sized businesses account for 98% of cyber insurance claims, totaling $1.6 billion in losses. Net Diligence is an organization that works with various cyber companies, cyber insurance companies, and they put together a very, very good report at the end of the year. It's a common misconception that large corporations are likely more to experience a fraud or cyber attack. And this gives many small to medium-sized businesses a false sense of security. And it's why many small to medium businesses fail to put in the proper controls, precautions, and processes in place. The belief that perpetrators are too busy with bigger fish and failing to follow good business practice is precisely what makes small to medium businesses an ideal target. Common attacks include identity fraud, investment fraud, romance fraud, extortion, and phishing, enacted through tactics such as direct call scams, emails, social media, and text messaging. The biggest weapon the fraudster has: data and information, and small to medium businesses give no shortage of ammunition, unfortunately. So why small to medium enterprises? Well, small to medium enterprises often collect sensitive personal identifying information, perhaps about their staff and about their clients. This can include social insurance numbers, confidential emails, employee records, and billing information. And when you combine that with the fact that small and medium enterprises often have multiple locations, sometimes working from home, especially over the last few years, they might have a bring your own device policy where people are allowed to bring in devices from home to use with company assets. And they might not have resources to spend on large scale cybersecurity or fraud prevention initiatives. And attackers know this, unfortunately, and that's why they are the target that I showed you on the last slide. Blurring the lines between personal and professional. Information security risks are more numerous than ever. And as you can see here, there's 5 bullet points. Our personal and professional lives are more merged than ever, especially over the last few years, as I mentioned, that we're working from home more often, right? As I sit here at home doing this presentation, I've got my corporate computer in front of me, and I've got a personal computer in front of me as well. And people are often merging those two together. Our work days are often less defined, right? No longer are we working, especially as a small to medium business owner, we're no longer working 9 to 5 type roles, right? We are working into the evening. We are working on weekends when we are also merging that personal and professional time. There is no such thing anymore. Emails and phone numbers. Often we use the same email or perhaps and phone numbers for both personal and professional matters. Obviously we recommend not to do that, especially with emails, and try to keep things as separate as possible. But that's not always a possibility for people. So we do see phone numbers specifically being used personally and professionally. We have a lot of online profiles that attackers can go and look for information of us. And I'm going to get to that on the next slide and how attackers can do that. But we are putting more and more information online about ourselves and our businesses that attackers can use against us. And then we combine that with our online activity, which is not just our profiles, but attackers can find our profiles and then they can go out and they can look for other things out there, such as breach credentials, and whatnot, and find out more information about us that then they can then use to craft fraud or cyber attacks against us that have that personal spin on them and make us think that they are legit. A perpetrator could look up an employee on LinkedIn, for example, or some of the other social media platforms that I'm showing here, and reference that information with perhaps online dating or other public social profiles. And the more data and information they have, the more believable their scheme will seem, and the more successful they will be in exploiting your weakness. I do sometimes tell a story in other presentations about, I did see a trend that started a few years ago where proud parents with small children at the first day of school in September were posting on various social platforms, including LinkedIn, pictures of their child on the first day of school. And the children are holding up signs that say, I'm starting kindergarten or I'm starting grade 1 at this school. And here's my teacher's name and a whole bunch of information on there. Well, attackers can use this. And I actually walked through in another presentation about if I was an attacker and I found that information, I would then try to find that school that the child was going to, and I would maybe draft up a fake a report and email the parents at their organization and say, your son or daughter got injured today. Here's a report for you to look at and sign. Don't worry, they're fine. No need to call the school. I just need you to look at this. And I would send it off to the parent. What parent wouldn't want to look at that if they got an email at their workplace saying your child has been injured? And that all started from posting that picture on LinkedIn. So we need to be very careful about what information we are putting out there on social media sites and other places online that attackers can then use that against us. So we often say, be a little bit wary of that. So I like to use the definition of cybersecurity, a blend of technologies, processes, and practices designed to protect networks, devices, programs, and data from attack damaged, or unauthorized access. But what if we applied that same definition to our overall business security and not just relying upon technology to save the day? What if we took this definition and not just applied it to cybersecurity, but about fraud in general or our overall business practice? So what do we try to do in this realm in cybersecurity and fraud prevention? Well, obviously, we want mature processes, methods, tools, and skills working in unison with a common goal. And well, what is that common goal? It results in well-trained people following well-developed procedures using well-implemented technology. And you can see from the definition I provided earlier and this screen here, it's everything combined together. We do still see a lot of small to medium organizations relying upon technology to save the day. And as you can see in these slides, it's everything from people, procedures, processes, and technology all merged in together. It's not just about security either, or cybersecurity. It's about security. Good security is good business practice. Before the internet, phone scams were common. Tools like caller ID, perhaps answering machines, directories, and call return helped to reduce that threat. More importantly, businesses encouraged employees to be more cautious about the information they shared over the phone. And a growing culture of training and security awareness continues to help companies protect against phone scams. As you can see in this slide, as a small or medium business owner, a lot of owners are focused on sales, marketing, finance, and their service and product. And so they should. But oftentimes security and risk is a little bit down below. And our hopes is that security and risk comes up to the exact same level as everything else, because it is truly important. And I did mention, earlier about, developing a corporate culture of training and security. And really, it's about time to change our mindset on things from it's the IT person's job to protect a company to it's up to all of us to protect a company, right? Unfortunately, one of the weak links in our organization is all of us. Right? We have our patterns as human beings that we do things. We like to answer emails. We like to respond to things very, very quickly. And sometimes that will cause, some grief down the road if we do that. So it's all up to all of us to have a security mindset to help protect our companies. So some fraud red flags that I want to go over. The first one is pressure. Criminals will often pressure us into, making quick decisions. And, we've seen that as well in various phishing emails or other types of threats that come in, right? They put a lot of time pressure. You need to do this now, or your accounts will be, frozen or whatnot. Right. So take a minute to fully assess the situation before making any sort of decision. Accusations. In some scams, the scammers will try to intimidate victims with accusations of potential criminal activity and by pretending to be in positions of authority. They tell victims or business owners that they need to comply to demands of providing information to investigators. We've unfortunately had a few clients that have fallen victim to this, where they've received emails and documents pretending to be from investigators and provided those investigators with information. Money up front, particularly in the case of an investigation into investment fraud. Be very wary of being asked to send any money up front, obviously. If it seems to be good to be true, it probably is. Promises to double, triple, or quadruple money in 6 months may seem unbelievable, and they likely are. Such high return or high level of return so quickly isn't realistic and should definitely be questioned. And again, unfortunately, we've had some clients fall victim to investment scams. Using encrypted chat apps to do business. Emails and written forms of communication are more reliable, and they can still be used in fraud schemes. And you must act with caution. In a lot of the cases that we've been helping our clients through, the fraudsters have asked people to move away from email onto using more encrypted chat applications such as WhatsApp or other types of applications. So just be a little bit wary if you see anybody wanting you to move off more traditional forms of communication. And the last one there is asking for remote access to your computer. There are a few instances where somebody would need remote access to your computer. Perhaps your internal or external IT, or maybe if you're calling a service provider, but normally you are the one initiating that. But be aware that a significant amount of your personal information, including your location, banking data, and other identifying information, lives on your computer, and it can be stolen in seconds. Right. So if anybody is asking for remote access to your computer, really, really make sure to do your due diligence. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Phil.
Thanks, Ryan. And thanks everybody for your time and for attending our session today. I really, really do. Both Ryan and I both appreciate your time and focus on this. And we're very happy to help any way we can. Ultimately, what I'm going to talk about for the last remainder part of this is about the component of how frauds or examples of frauds that are being perpetrated and some of the responses or protections against those. But ultimately, frauds is a breach of a trust issue. It's all about trust, whether it's a person to person or now because of our digital environments, it's system to system sometimes. Fraud is almost always the result of someone providing trust way too broadly or too freely. If you go to the next slide, Ryan. And an example of that I'll go through some of those erosion of trust is one of the most common ones we see today is what's called the business email imposter. In some of the technology centers, you'll hear this as business email compromise, very similar. And what that really means, it's a form of phishing, which is an email that you would receive where somebody is the sender of the email is an imposter. They're acting as if it's someone else that you may trust, such as a CEO of a company or a doctor or a lawyer or someone that they may believe that you have a trust in. And the intent of that is to get you to action something in that email. That could be click on a link to go to a website. It could be to open an attachment, or sort of the two most common approaches. And what they're ultimately trying to do is to get you to engage or somehow action whatever the ask is in the email while acting as someone you trust. And it can become difficult with an organization for small and medium-sized businesses and any company in any size as you rely more and more on different technologies to communicate, of validating, is the email or is the text message I'm receiving, or as we just saw with Ryan's demo a little bit earlier, is even the phone call I'm getting really the person who they say they are in that email or phone call or text. And so one of the key issues here, or one of the key things to look at, is what exactly are the pieces to look for when you're going through an email imposter approach. If you go for the next slide, right? So as an example of the CEO fraud, one of the most common areas that we still see during our investigations are when somebody receives an email, an employee receives an email, and it'll say, hi, Jane or Frank or whoever. They'll address you by name, so it appears more personal. And they'll one of the most common ones we'll see right now is they'll ask you to buy something like gift cards. Do you want to buy an Apple iTunes gift card? Or they'll say, we're having a staff party, we're having a celebration coming up at a staff meeting. I'm looking for you to buy some gifts for people at the meeting, maybe some gift cards from a retail location, please. Could I ask you to please go and buy them? And then email me back when you buy them. And they'll usually ask for details. Could you send me the serial numbers or the codes in the back of those cards? And what's happening is that the employee is acting on that email as if it was the CEO or some other person that they trust, asking them to make that purchase or to go and purchase those items. When we go backwards in time and we do an investigation and start interviewing with folks, one of the questions I'll ask is, of the person who received the email, is, does the CEO normally email you, or whomever this person is that sent you that request? Is this person you normally have interactions with on a regular basis? For a lot of people, depending on the size of your organization, sometimes a day-to-day or a task-based request from an email or a text message isn't common. So if we continue down that path of Is it normal for that person, the CEO or whoever it is that sent you that message? Is it normal for them to ask you to buy gift cards or to action this type of item? For a lot of employees, they'll say, no, I actually don't. This is not a common request. And so if we continue on to then ask, what was the motivation behind it? Well, why did you decide to action this specific email or text messages? It almost always comes back to a very common answer, which is, I don't want to let the CEO down, or I don't want to let the person who's sending me this request down. That's an element of trust. People are inherently trusting the email or the text as being who it's from. And unfortunately, that's what fraudsters are really capitalizing on is that people inherently want to trust. We want to believe the email or the text message we got is from the person that purports who it is. And that's really one of the most fundamental controls, if you will, or preventions against a lot of the frauds you'll hear about, is validating who is actually sending this through an alternative way. And I'll go through some examples here shortly. Account compromise is an example where some organizations may actually have had their email system attacked. There may be an attacker or a hacker already inside the company, and they're sending emails from the company legitimately, meaning it actually is from their email server, but it's not the person who's actually the email account. It's not the same person. It's actually the attacker sending it using, as an example, Phil's email account. And so even though that email may pass a lot of the security tool checks for the email itself, it's an example of how within an organization it's growing. Unfortunately, the fraud risk is growing, and the ways that attackers are finding ways to defraud individuals is also growing. So that example through the CEO fraud, account compromises, impersonation are all examples of how attackers are really using still our trust in our system, our trust in communication, in the text and emails to defraud or get an action going. If you go to the next slide, right? So what is the protection against us? Really process. It's not going to be a tool. It's not going to be something very digitally. Tools can help. There are a number of security tools that are continuously evolving over time that can help, but the reliance is not about on a tool. A lot of the organizations that both Ryan and I deal with will have a view that will say, hey, if you're running a business, you're busy enough. You're busy running your business day to day. You're busy with dealing with a number of issues. All of us have full agendas, full timelines of what we're doing every day of just to manage work. So we are looking sometimes to have tools help us through that process. But it's this reliance on tools that if I bought a security tool or if I install it and it's running, therefore it will stop all of this, and I can not put a process in place, or I don't have to worry about it any further. And unfortunately, that's not quite the case. Tools can help, but really what the biggest defense is are processes of how you run your business. So processes are really one of the most cost-effective shield against any security threats. If you don't have the right process in place, you and your business will actually be vulnerable quite frequently as technology continues to evolve and it continues to get it to expand in different ways. The process level is actually what's the biggest defense that can help you. So it's an example in that CEO fraud example I just gave previously. It's far less likely to succeed if you have a process in place whereby, as an example, any purchases in your company must go through an approved channel, or it must go through a second person inside of your company to approve. And a process to that may be that if the request process is by email, that you may have a second or an alternative way that approval is done, such as it could be face-to-face, it could be over a Teams call, meaning it's not necessarily, if it's email, it's not an email approval. It could be a different system. Some organizations use an account purchasing application or some sort of website that helps approve financial payments to organizations. The point being is there's more than one way to get an approval and to get confirmation that the request is genuine. So that is a process that's helping to intercept those requests all of us can be susceptible to these scams over time. So really, the ability to stay up to date and stay current as to all the scams that are occurring is really difficult for everybody. So this is why process becomes such an important component to this. Even as an example for passwords, having a process within your organization to regularly change your passwords for things like your banking sites or for your vendor sites or for your government sites, websites that you're working with. And another example would be spending alerts. If your bank offers it, and I think most banks today do, you can set up alerts in your banking accounts so that if any dollar amount gets transacted, whether it's deposited or withdrawn, that there's an alert sent out. It can be text or email. The banks are slightly different. But even personally, as an example, I set my personal banking alerts down to $1. So if a dollar comes in or a dollar comes out, I get a text message and an email from my bank saying this occurred, here's the transaction date, and here's the vendor, if you will, or where that money went to. And over time, that helps give a bit of second review or second visibility in terms of what's actually happening with the money in your accounts. One of the most really big effective ways is MFA, or multi-factor authentication. And what that really is that when you have a username and password for a website that you log into, now after you use a username and password and you sort of click submit or you click enter to enter the site, many sites now, websites, will then require you to have a second authentication, meaning like a code. It may be a code that is sent over text message. It could be a code that is set up in an application in your mobile device, as an example, or an email that's sent to you that says, okay, even though you have the right username and password, we want a code. We want this time-sensitive code that changes on a regular basis. And that's called multi-factor authentication. And realistically, multi-factor authentication is one of the most effective ways of reducing a number of these attacks digitally that are occurring, but also with people. Unfortunately, humans also maliciously sometimes perpetrate these frauds, or people that we know internally may actually perpetrate these frauds. So multi-factor is helping and assisting with that authentication and access into those sensitive areas of your data or systems by limiting who actually has access to those usernames and passwords. And dual signatures as an example. So for a lot of businesses that have now primarily gone digital, as an example, there may be less and less reliance on things like paper checks or other purchase orders or approvals that may be in a paper-based. But the concept is still the same, which is you may require, or you can set up requirements to have more than one person have to sign a check or have to authorize a withdrawal or electronic transfer. If we're talking pure electronic in your bank, most banks now will have the option to allow you to have multiple people sign or approve that financial transfer or that withdrawal that comes from your account. That's an example of dual signatures evolving into the digital world, but it now requires a process where there's more than one person. It's a bit of a check and balance to make sure that the approval or that withdrawal or that payment is actually meant to occur. Go to the next slide. But one of the key elements here all across everything from trust is verification. There's a common saying from, I believe it was President Reagan, but it was like, trust but verify. Trust is an element that is inherent with us as humans, but we need to verify as we evolve more and more into digital, and a lot more of our transactions are becoming automated. There is still a requirement to verify components. So as similar to some of the points that Ryan talked about at the very beginning of what the fraudsters are trying to motivate with, and some of those examples were like urgency messages. The email that comes in or the text message that comes in is urgent. You have to action this right now. That's a red flag that Ryan had there. So here's an example of some of the counteractions to some of those red flags. The first one is slow down. Almost, take a minute if you're getting any of those messages, and we all get them, that say, hey, urgently, I need you to approve something or to transfer some money for us or to purchase something. Take a minute. Generally, no legitimate company or organization is going to pressure you to make that decision or to provide a payment immediately within minutes. And if they do, you want to start getting a second opinion or talk to or verify that request if that actually is urgent. But the key element at the very beginning is slow down. Take a minute. take a pause to understand, is this text or message or email really from that company or person? Checking the email account that it came from. Is it Phil at sort of, mmp.com as an example for work, or is it Phil at something.com? It doesn't quite match. Maybe my email address isn't coming from a corporate address, corporate account that you would expect it to. The second component is to do your diligence. Sometimes even a single Google search can actually help you determine if a would-be scammer's claims are actual factual or fake. If you're being pressured or if you're receiving that communication to urgently act on it, again, from slowing down, taking a minute, and actually checking online and verify a different way is whether or not the identity of the person you're dealing with or chatting with online are who they say. If it is a fraud that's been perpetrated a few times, there's a number of websites and a number of chat forums that actually may, just through a Google search, may actually start indicating that, hey, I received, other people will post or talk about, hey, I've received a scam email that has these characteristics, or that came from this person or this entity that is purporting to be something. And that can give you an indicator as to whether or not what you're receiving and looking at is legitimate or not. The third component is speaking with someone you trust, seeking some advice. If you're wondering if this move or if this transfer is the right one or not, from a technical perspective, not from a business perspective, you would know that. But if you're still concerned or you still have questions about whether or not you should be actioning this email or text message, or sending the funds electronically, work and talk to somebody you trust. It could be your accountant, it could be a lawyer, it could be an IT professional that is not connected or that has a bit of an arm's length, that may actually have a fresh eyes as to what is that email or what is that text, to see whether or not there's something that catches their attention as being a red flag or as being an indicator of that it may be a fraudulent approach. So it doesn't hurt to seek some additional advice and reach out to your peer group. And the final component is, don't provide personal information digitally unless you actually are verified that it is required, that it is the right entity, and that the method that you're sending that information is secure. So scammers will often pressure you to provide personal information such as your date of birth, address, or more. And the key thing is always do not provide that personal information without consulting either with a professional that you trust, or that you've done your due diligence to confirm that. And that's very common. Is one of the first steps that scammers will do, or attackers will do in a fraud, is they're just trying to see whether or not somebody replies. It's not about even the information in the very beginning. Because unfortunately a lot of breaches have occurred globally, and they're still continuing, and they're going to continue to grow, is that a lot of our own personal information, like our names and our email addresses and phone numbers, unfortunately can be quite common out there in various databases with organizations. So the fact that somebody knows my phone number or knows my email address in itself is not necessarily a red flag, but I want to understand now what exactly what it is that what they're asking us to do. So as an example, if I'm getting a request for, hey, Phil, haven't heard from you for a while. Can you please let me know your home address? I have a gift to send you. And it sounds like maybe it's from a client or a vendor or somebody I work with. The sending of that personal information, take a moment, slow down, and say, is my personal address or is my personal information being asked about actually something that I'm expecting this to occur? But on top of that, yeah, it may not even be a response to it. And even if some people would go down the path of saying, hey, I think this is a scam, so I'm going to reply once. I'm going to initiate a response. I'm not going to give them my information, but I'm going to respond just to see if I can push this a little bit further. Don't do any of that. A lot of the attacks are just looking for that initial response to see, because our information is so prevalent out there today, is this a real person on the other side of that text message or on that email? So even just replying gives the attackers immediately their green flag to say, yes, there's a human here. We've got somebody who's responding. Now let's engage. Now let's send more emails, more texts to try to see if they can manipulate you into sending information or to getting you to click on a link or open an attachment. So if you have suspicions on anything that you receive, the approach of slowing down, do your due diligence, speaking to someone you trust, don't provide personal information, helps provide a little bit of a pause, a break before that sort of initial reaction that we have to respond. But it also, if you do feel that it is a fraud, what we get into recommending here later on is about reporting it to things like the Canadian Cyber Center, your local law enforcement, so that they have information about it. But the key element is here: don't respond. If you do believe it's fraudulent, don't respond in any fashion. Even if it's simply to let them know that you know it's a fraud, that in itself is exposing you a little bit further. Next slide, Brad. So making time for good business overall. So small to medium-sized businesses, like I said earlier, are busy. All of you are busy already doing, you're maxed out primarily with running your business and doing everything you need to do to run, execute, survive, and succeed. So with so many priorities, you may be just looking for that simple or single solution for fraud prevention. And unfortunately, like I mentioned earlier, that plug-and-play security solution of just sort of one product or something I can buy to set and forget is what we're all looking for, but it doesn't quite exist. They help, and there are tools that can assist with this, but it really still comes down to a process component. So unfortunately, fraud is too dynamic and nuanced for any single tool to protect against. There's always a place for those different tools and products, but they have to exist within how you run your business and how you work. So that verification check, that permeates your building your company culture that is asking to verify and reinforcing with your staff that we want to double check, that we are looking for feedback or second eyes or somebody to actually help collaborate, even within your staff, is actually a really good culture that can start building to say, hey, can you help me take a look at this? This doesn't quite seem right. There's an analogy that over the years is trust your gut. And by far over the years that Ryan and I have been working in this, almost every time, I'll say for a large percentage of the time when we come in during an incident or investigation afterwards, and we do interviews and we talk to the staff or the people who may have been a part of this, it's almost in the majority of times that we're doing these investigations, we'll hear comments from people saying, you know what, it just didn't seem right. That email or that text just didn't sit right with me. It actually seemed a little odd. And that's actually a really good indicator. A lot of us, as digital communication has become so common now and so prevalent as part of how we run our business, we're actually attuning ourselves to what's becoming, we're getting that second sense, that second gut feeling as to what is real or not. So that pause, that on the previous slide I talked about, is taking a bit of a pause before you act and action anything, can actually really help us even personally get a bit of a reset as to say, is this something that is really legitimate or not? Next slide. So as Ryan mentioned, working remotely is a fact of life now. It's a part of how business has evolved. And so there are some unique components to working remotely for your team that can help reduce that fraud presence, the fraud exposure to it. So one is specifically requiring strong passwords. We can follow up afterwards in terms of there's many guides. The Cyber Center for Canada produces some excellent guides for small and medium-sized businesses about how to require and what is a strong password. And these need to be across all your devices and workstations in case they're left unattended. We still find, unfortunately, a lot of organizations that would say is, hey, we have really good passwords and we require them on our employees' cell phones or laptops or computers and email accounts, but we actually don't enforce a lot of them for some of the executive or some of the senior folks who may request not having some of those controls. And that's actually where the fraudsters are attacking for a lot of types of employees of the organization. So our recommendations apply across the organization, not just to certain employees. It applies to everybody who who needs to access accounts or has a right to work on your systems. Setting up a VPN as a virtual private network. That means when you're working remotely, you may be using your Wi-Fi at home. You may be using a cellular network that's not part of your corporate network or your business employer's network. What a VPN does is as soon as you get on your Wi-Fi at home or a cellular network, it connects back into your corporate network and it encrypts all of your traffic so that it looks like your device is actually part of the corporation and it's protecting that communication. Multi-factor authentication I talked about already as an example. And what we'll go towards is WPA2 or PA3 encryption. So if you're using wireless at home or in your office, which is quite popular, WPA2 or PA3 are encryption standards for the wireless communication, and they're fairly standard now and common in almost any wireless router that you can buy, whether it's just out of a store or whether it's corporate or enterprise based. The encryption settings are quite common now in most routers or most wireless access points that you can configure yourself. But also for a lot of organizations, or for by default, a lot of the routers may not quite have that encryption set to a higher limit. So it's one of those things to take a look at inside of your environment, your network, your wireless network, is to double check and confirm, are we using the best possible encryption and security for our wireless communication? And the final is being, limiting public Wi-Fi usage. So it's going to those coffee shops or public Wi-Fi environments that can be convenient, but they can be a risk. And the risk is that anybody can create a wireless access point just from their own phone or their own computer. If you know what you're doing, you can sit in an airport or you can sit in a coffee shop and broadcast out a free Wi-Fi and have people around you who are looking for free Wi-Fi to connect to your system and then go to the internet. So from that person's perspective, they're on the internet, they're working just fine, but all of their traffic is going through this attacker's laptop that may be sitting in the same physical area as the coffee shop or airport, and they're seeing that data and they're watching what's going on. So that's the risk of public Wi-Fi. Public Wi-Fi is needed and it can be very helpful, but public Wi-Fi and a VPN usually work very well together. So that even if you're in a high risk Wi-Fi usage area and you do need to connect, using the VPN right after you connect can actually help reduce that risk by encrypting that traffic. Next slide. And the final one we'll go through that we see quite a bit of is a tech support scam. So another type of a phishing attack, these scams are usually executed by malicious actors that are impersonating tech support teams. They pretend to be from large, sort of well-known organizations that are stating that they've detected an issue or a security concern with your computer. And then they'll try to get you to open a file or engage with them, as Ryan mentioned earlier about remote access. One of the most common elements is that you will see users that will be browsing an internet. They'll just be on the internet on their corporate computer, not doing anything malicious, just simply going to websites. And sometimes they'll see a pop-up that will show up. It'll say, we detected something wrong with your computer. Click here immediately to fix it, or click here immediately to connect you to the IT help desk. That would be an example of the red flag that Ryan talked about earlier. So ultimately what they're trying to do is get access into your environment by acting as if you're something wrong with your computer and they want action. Again, getting back to those red flags that we talked about earlier, that Ryan talked about, and the preventions against them is urgency. Hurry, something's wrong. So that should be a red flag, as Ryan talked about, immediately to say, if there's this urgency to try to get toward to try to get you to click on something and try to action something, that should be your first red flag to say, is this really needed? Is this really legitimate? Is it part of what our company does? And then pause, ask support, reach out, ask questions from someone else that's disconnected from that to see whether or not this is legitimate for your organization or not. Next slide. So if you do fall victim to a tech support scam, one of the things, there's sort of 4 quick steps that we would recommend that any organization goes through. Specifically, change your passwords immediately using a unique password for each service and account. It is quite common still that that a company or a person, all of us, for individuals, will use the same username and password across multiple systems or multiple websites that we use because it's convenient, it's easy to remember. And if one of those websites, it may have nothing to do with you, you may have literally no control over this, is that if that website that you're interacting with gets compromised and their database of username and passwords gets compromised by a hacker and gets published, which is one of the most common ways it's happening right now, is that database of usernames and passwords will get published on the dark web for other attackers to use. They will immediately start, the attackers will immediately start creating automated bots, if you will, automated approaches where they'll try every possible website they can with your username and password that they just got a copy of from whichever company they compromised. So if you have the same username and password at multiple sites, it becomes very easy for the attackers to get into multiple locations that you may have a service with. So using unique passwords across your different sites is really important. Second is contact your credit card or bank company to request that they reverse any charges if there has been a credit card charge on it, or to put a block, or request a new credit card if there's an element that your credit details or your payment information may have been compromised. Always check your statements regularly afterwards to confirm that the scammers don't continually try to access your account. And as I mentioned earlier, setting up financial alerts with your credit card or bank information is also getting that sort of statement or getting that information in your hands really quickly and timely so that you have visibility in terms of what's happening and going through your accounts. The third one being is confirming that your network hasn't been compromised and that you have somebody with a cybersecurity expertise or with some of your IT professionals working with you to understand whether or not and check your systems, whether or not there's a piece of malware or virus that may still be on that computer or network, which may have been allowing that attacker to get access to your environment. And the final component is using your security software to scan for things. As I mentioned, tools are important. It's just not relying on them as being the one and only protection against frauds and cyber attacks. Having an up-to-date, recent, modern antivirus, anti-phishing tools, very common out there from many vendors out there, is important. Keeping them up to date is important. But the key issue here that Ryan aren't really talking about from a theme overall is that it's just one component of protecting you and your organization, not the only way of protecting you and your organization. Last slide. So from a tech support scam, as I've mentioned, if you're not expecting a tech support call, it's likely a scam. Just hang up. If they call you, if it's on a phone call, and even if they appear legitimate, creating that space and pause is really effective to try to reevaluate whether or not this is legitimate or not and seek additional support or reach out to someone who can maybe give you a different perspective. Never give out your passwords or personal information unless you absolutely know who it is to. There should be nobody asking for a password for any means whatsoever for it. That means they're logging in as you. So even legitimate tech support and legitimate support people from whether it be government or businesses you deal with, they can provide support, but they don't require your password. That's a key element here. Is there's no one who's going to require your password. And then the final part is ignoring computer pop-ups that instruct you to call tech support. Even if they appear legitimate, if you're seeing a pop-up, it's usually an indicator of something more malicious that's occurring. Again, pause, don't act on it, and seek support, or have your IT person look at that environment, or their cybersecurity person look at that environment to see if there's anything malicious running on it. Last slide. So that's the end of our presentation. We really do want to thank you for your time and for your attention through this. We're going to go through I believe there's some questions we'll go through with the time we've got here, and Ryan and I will just sort of go through them the best we can. And as Ryan mentioned, if we're not able to address them all, we'll be following them up offline afterwards. Ryan, I'll just turn it over to you in terms of, is there any questions? I haven't had a chance to go through them right now, but if there's a question that stands out that we want to go through, I'll.
Before we get to the questions, I'd love to tell a bit of a personal story here.
Yeah.
We went through, and Phil talked through the CEO fraud, right? Where people pretend to be your CEO and reach out to you. And I can tell you that recently happened to me on the weekend. I get a text out of the blue, pretending to be from our CEO, pressure, right? Please respond immediately. This is very urgent. Also saying this is, please keep this quiet, right? I need just your help on this, and please do keep it quiet. And responded with our CEO's name. So obviously I didn't react, but it is human nature to look at that. And even myself, who has been working in this field for a long time, I looked at it and thought at the very beginning, I thought, wow, the CEO is reaching out to me. He must need some help. And then, a second later, I was like, this is totally scam, right? And obviously didn't respond. But for that brief second there, you do get, you think that you need to respond to your CEO or somebody else. So it happens to all of us, right? And we are seeing it now more. It used to be a lot of emails, and we're starting to see it now a lot more text messages or phone calls as well, right? With the AI voice authentication. So let's go to some of the questions here.
I've got one here. So and thanks everybody for putting questions, and we really do appreciate it. So just, and obviously with time, we're not able to go through all of them, but one I've picked out here is from an anonymous person. If your company does experience an email breach, I think I'll click on answer live here. If your company does experience an email breach or have a fraudulent person reach out impersonating someone from your or another organization, what steps would you recommend to mitigate the potential loss or negative effects? Ryan, did you want to start with that one?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the one thing is we talked about in this presentation, if somebody does reach out to you impersonating somebody else, you know, do your due diligence, pause right away, right? Anybody that is reaching out about a breach or whatnot, do your due diligence, make sure that it is somebody, you know, that you can trust and that it is doing that. And I can tell you that law enforcement will reach out to organizations and say, you have been involved in a breach. We want to let you know. We've been seeing your information in some of our information that we've been investigating. So just slow things down, do your due diligence, talk to somebody else that you need to trust, and really verify, as Phil mentioned earlier. Verification is really, really important here if somebody is reaching out to you know, from another organization. Anything
Yeah,
else to
and
add to that, Phil? Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And so it's a great question. So and just to continue on with that is I'd say is from a tactical perspective, again, depending on what it is that you believe, if it's a money issue or if it's more like just click on a link or open this PDF as an example, letting the Cyber Center Canada. So the Cyber Center Canada is Canada's national center that includes all of the law enforcement agencies. That is a 24/7 clearinghouse and a 24/7 alert environment for organizations. Any business can participate and work with Cyber Center Canada. So I would inform law enforcement. I would inform Cyber Center Canada just for their information. Cyber Center Canada won't necessarily respond or have a 24/7 incident response, but they actually do work with law enforcement and industry quite closely to update systems or put out notices. The second component is your bank. If you have any suspicion that there may be access to your bank, is to immediately contact your bank and either lock your accounts or monitor your accounts, and also let the bank know that you are suspecting something malicious may be occurring, so that the bank is aware of that, what's going on. And also, as Ryan mentioned, working with either your IT or cybersecurity professional to double check and validate the systems that you're working on to make sure that they're actually clean.
I'll grab one here,
Sure.
Phil, that might fall into our realm a little bit. It says from David, why can't we get an employee prosecuted for fraud and theft? And it sounds to me like they've taken this matter to law enforcement. And as I mentioned at the beginning, both Phil and I are ex-law enforcement as well. Again, we do work very, very closely with law enforcement on some of our matters. I'm working directly with law enforcement on a few engagements right now. Obviously, if you have any sort of fraud or employee investigation or whatnot, you can always contact, somebody like a fraud or cybersecurity company like M&P, and also law enforcement. Call both if need be and get advice from both. And like I mentioned, we obviously can work in conjunction depending on the matter. Unfortunately, we do hear this sometimes that our clients have gone to law enforcement and they didn't really get the response that they wanted to. Unfortunately, again, law enforcement have their priorities. Sometimes they do have case backlogs, but it's still very, very important for you to report it to law enforcement, and you can get an incident number. So then, if you did have to go and report a loss or whatnot to your insurance company for a claim, you do have that incident number that you can go to, even if the police may or may not investigate it down the road. And just because they say right now that they won't investigate it doesn't mean that they might not down the road. I do know that when I was in law enforcement and working in the fraud department, I was working on frauds that had occurred 5 years ago, unfortunately, and I was just calling people and saying, we're getting into your fraud now. So it does unfortunately happen, but please feel free to reach out to Phil or myself, and we'd be happy to at least start the ball rolling for you.
Thanks. I think just with, I think if we're ending here at the top of the hour, I'll just one last question on upvote here. What can we do to protect ourselves from business email imposters? We get emails on a regular basis from people impersonating the founder of the company. We mark the emails as spam and phishing. And is there anything else we can do? One of the biggest things, it's a great question. Thanks. And one of the biggest things you can do is if you get regular emails, or if you're getting emails from somebody, another company or a CEO or someone or that you believe is fraudulent, let that real company know. A lot of companies have been compromised or may have actually an attacker inside their email accounts that they don't know. A lot of attackers will stay silent inside of the organization for that purpose, so that they can use that email account or that system. So if you're seeing it and it's not legitimate, which is great, think about communicating with, and maybe different than email, a phone call or through a different, maybe even a different medium. Let that company know, or let that person know that, hey, you know what, we're seeing emails showing up as your name or as your company, because there may be issues on side of that company that they can deal with that's causing that. That's a great question. Thank you.
So I believe we are at time, unfortunately. It's been a pleasure being here. And again, we will get these questions, and our contact information is on this slide. So if you do have some other questions, please feel free to reach out to either Phil or myself. And for those of you that have put some questions in here, and there's a lot. I think there's 44 right now. We only got to 3 or 4 of them, so there's a lot that we can do. We'll reach out to some of you if we can get your name and contact information. We will certainly reach out and follow up with you. It's been an absolute pleasure here today, and on behalf of myself and Phil and M&P overall, we wish you all the best, and please be safe out there, and hope some of the things we informed you about today can keep you and your companies safe and secure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.